Very good to see you. Yes, yet another Wednesday, wonderful day, and third day of the week, and we are in the third section of the foundational for our series. And today we are going to be discussing the three major crops that, as we discussed yesterday, or I know we didn't go into this, but I mentioned in passing that the three crops that are, you can almost say without fear of contradiction, that are enslaving us are one, corn. Corn is the biggest elephant in the room. Doesn't even, everything else almost pales compared to the influence that corn has on our food system. The second one is wheat, and the third one is soy. So let's start. Of all the crops you can grow and apply chemical fertilizer, corn happens to be the one that will consume the most compared to any other plant. So corn starts out on a very wrong footing because it consumes more fertilizer than anything else. And because of the fact that corn consumes fertilizer, is a challenge on one side, is a benefit on the other side, because in terms of corrupt or food system that we talked about yesterday, that's the Western model that is geared towards making profits, then it becomes the best tool in the hands of people's whose ideology is influenced by the Western model system that is militaristic. That's because you have a commodity that can use a lot of chemical fertilizer and can grow in areas that makes that commodity easy to grow, even in areas where the soil might not be very suitable for it. Because all you really need for corn to grow is water. It's not very picky to climatic conditions. And you need water and a lot of fertilizer. And even poor soil, as long as you can put fertilizer, it can grow. So that's how corn first starts out. But secondly, and most important, is that corn is the one most commonly used grain in the world because of the factors that we discussed yesterday, because of visit to the US, which is where the corn came. Corn came from Mexico. So because of the voyage of the Spaniards, or what they call the conquistadors, because they came to America, that marked a new era in the food system in the world, because it precipitated the spread of corn worldwide. So you can imagine, before Columbus came to the US, corn was only restricted to the Americas. Everybody else in Asia, in Africa, in Europe, was eating mainly other grains except corn. But because of what happened with the conquistadors, corn started becoming very, very slowly, as more territories were conquered by the Western powers of the days, and especially the British and the Spaniards, corn would become the staple food where they went. The places they went, they will make corn a staple food, or very, very close to it. But in the end of the 20th century, then corn was everywhere. It was a major commodity. As you hit the first century, is the one most commonly consumed grain in the whole world. Now, if you're going to grow corn, and corn uses a lot of nutrients, therefore it requires a lot of a chemical fertilizer. It goes hand in hand. There's a big correlation between the increased use of corn and the increased manufacturing of chemical fertilizer. So these two things went hand in hand for a long time, for at least 50 or to 60 years. into the 21st century. And then, as we were hitting the Second World War, a chemical called Roundup was created first as Agent Orange. It was used as a chemical during the Vietnam War as a defoliator. And the reason why the chemical was created is because America was engaged in a fight in Vietnam. And the war in Vietnam did not have a standing army. It was not like the war in Ukraine right now, where you have this army on one side fighting for territory, and this one is fighting on this side for this territory, and they have a battle line. No, it was really a guerrilla war. So the Vietnamese didn't have a standing army formally as a standing army. It was like some of the Kenyans who are here. It was like the Mau Mau, but a little bit obviously that's more advanced in terms of, it was more elaborate because there were more powers that were supporting different sides of the war. So what happened is the Vietnam resistance forces would escape into the forest, and then they'll just attack, sporadically attack the installations that or the military installations of the Americas, across the country. So it was a hit and run. So it was a very, very weird war, just like we've seen in many other wars since, like in Iraq, where, or Afghanistan, where American soldiers are on the ground, but really there's nobody they are really fighting. They have to go and look for the terrorists wherever they find them. So what happened is that one corporation was given a contract to produce a chemical that could be used by the Americans to defoliate the forest in Vietnam, where the Vietnam soldiers, resistance freedom fighters were hiding. So this chemical, was created. It was used. The active ingredient in the chemical was glyphosate, and it was initially created as a antibiotic, but it didn't have any practical application at that time because it's toxic. But the company found a very easy way to make money and got the contract from the government, and they would make this chemical called glyphosate. They named it yellow Agent Orange so that it can defoliate. But the company made a lot of chemicals because they had to wrongly predicted that war would last almost 6 years longer than it did. So they had all these Agent Orange that it was manufactured but could not be used. And even if the government paid for them, they still have those very toxic chemicals that they don't know how to get rid of. So that's how Agent Orange would very quickly be turned into a farming agent called Roundup. So the company we know today as Monsanto, which has deep ties, very direct ties, to a very notorious company in Germany that was called RB Farbin, which would later become Bayer, and was very active in the making of the gas that Hitler used in the gas chambers in Germany to kill Jews and blacks. So Agent Orange now transitions from being a defoliator in the Vietnam War and becomes a chemical to be used in growing food. Now, the challenge is the reason why Roundup was approved to be used as in farming is because the scientists made a compelling argument that while Agent Orange, glyphosate, the active ingredient, is toxic, human beings really don't have to be worried about it, too much about it, because the way glyphosate kills the plants. The reason why we would defoliate the trees and it will kill weeds. Now, glyphosate is being sold as a weed killer, is because it interferes with the mechanism that the plant uses to deliver food. Whenever it gets nutrients from the ground, to deliver the food into the plant so that it can use, like to the cells of the plants. And that pathway is called the shikmic pathway. The shikmic pathway is a pathway that delivers food from the nutrients from the ground into the soil so that it can grow. Human beings don't have the shikmic pathway. So the argument was, even if you ingest glyphosate, it will not interfere with our accessing the nutrients from the food that we eat. So it was approved. Now, companies, like we said, that are major players in the food system that we currently have, are only interested in one thing: making money. And according to the Western model of business, competition is sin. That's what one of the first billionaires, the first billionaire in the US, John Rockefeller, once said, competition is sin. And Rockefeller, as well as other Western corporations, rose to dominance through ruthless means of destroying their competition, annihilating, that's the word I was looking for, annihilating their competition. So once Roundup was approved and it was started being used as a weed killer, Monsanto took a couple of other steps to ensure that they entrenched themselves as the dominant company that controls the food industry. In fact, there is some research that shows that one of the major players in the company, actually the executives of the company that called R.G. Farbin, that was making the gas agent that was being used by Hitler's soldiers to kill Jews and blacks, he got arrested at the end of the war. And when he got arrested, he was tried at the Nuremberg trial, along with other agents who are working for Hitler and all the supporting companies. And the executive was jailed, and he did some time in jail. He spent a lot of time in jail. And while he was in jail, he had enough time to reflect on the ongoings and the strategy that Hitler used in order to dominate the world. And he concluded by, in his writing, say, in modern days, you can use weapons to control people. A more strategic thing to use would have been food. If you can control the food, then you can control the world. So these are not all two new ideas that we are talking about, even as when Monsanto tries to come up with strategies of dominating the food industry. So saying that to say that Monsanto is now manufacturing Roundup and is becoming the preferred weed killer globally through their marketing agents and such. But you can only use Roundup to kill weeds before you plant whatever food you want to plant. So they finally realized they can make more money if they can control all the weeding, because now you can only plant, spray Roundup when the crops are not growing. You kill the weeds, you plow, but the weeds that will grow between the time you planted the crops and the time you harvested, then the farmer has to find other ways, but they cannot use Roundup. And that's part of the reason why Monsanto started creating seeds that are called Roundup Ready. Seeds of corn that allow, or soy, that will allow you to grow those seeds and still apply Roundup. And Roundup will not interfere with the shikmic pathway of those crops. That was high-level of engineering to make such a crop or such a line of corn. So what happened is that once those seeds hit the market, two major benefits will accrue to Monsanto. Number one, they'll be very, very convenient for the farmer because the farmer doesn't have to worry really about labor, because you can spray Roundup to kill the weeds, you plow, then you can plant the corn, then you can just spray the weeds that will come, and then after a while, then you don't have to spray again. And then all you have to do now is harvest the corn. That makes it very, very convenient. That's not one benefit. The second benefit is that Monsanto will have something that's patented, that once you grow this corn, because it's intellectual property, which was another story for another day, there's law, international law, against patenting things that are already existing. You patent something that you've invented. So you can't patent seeds. Seeds was not something you can patent. And actually, Monsanto had to come up with a bacteria that they first patented in order to subvert that law through the Supreme Court. And they took the case to the Supreme Court just so that they can say, oh yeah, you're allowed to patent things like seeds or bacteria or things like that. So now you have Monsanto having a chemical agent that they can kill weeds, but also with seeds that can withstand the spraying of Roundup without being affected. Those two things help to accelerate two major crises. One, it accelerated the enlargement or the enlargement of the average amount of acreage that corn farmers or the average farmers was growing. So more and more corporations started getting in the business of growing corn, because America would also see, the American government would also see an opportunity to advance its own agenda in this process that I just explained, that I'll tell you in a minute. But the average size of a farm in America growing corn started ballooning because more and more investors were getting in land business, in growing corn, because corn was subsidized, and I'll explain that in a minute. But let me just suffice to say that just for now, that the average size of farm started getting bigger, and those big size farms were growing more corn than anything else because of the subsidies that the government was giving. So that becomes a major boon for Monsanto, because the more other corporations get in the business of growing corn, the more corn seeds that Monsanto was selling and the more Roundup they will sell. So what happens in America really happens in other major parts of the world. So other countries also started joining the fray to grow Monsanto GMO seeds, genetically modified seeds, partly because of the major advertisement campaign by Monsanto, but also because of the pressure from the American government. So I'll pause back right there, and then I'll talk about the side of the government, and then we tie all of them together. Why was the American government interested in GMO seeds and Roundup, and also ensuring that Monsanto becomes a very profitable company? The government's interest lies in global politics. America knows that they cannot compete in terms of the cost of production per bushel of corn with most other parts of the world, maybe save for Europe. The labor cost in the US, the cost of machines, the mechanized agriculture in the US makes it a very, very expensive endeavor. When you compare that to a small scale farmer, let's say, for example, in Kenya, who has maybe 3 or 4 children, is farming an average of 2 or 3 acres, That's land that a farmer can do manually. And even if he doesn't do manually with his family, the cost of labor in Kenya is maybe $3 or $4 a day. In the US, the labor cost is about $8 to $10 an hour for just 1 hour. So you see, just going on labor costs, a farmer in America farming 3 acres, everything else being equal, and a farmer in America in Kenya farming 3 acres, they cannot compete in terms of the cost of production of their corn. So because America cannot compete with other countries, what it does is subsidizes its farmers. It tells the farmers in America, you grow the corn, take the corn to the market, and sell it slightly below the market price of the lowest price. Whatever loss you make will cover that and will give you a standard return on your investment. Okay, and that's how America subsidizes their farmers. Africa and other parts of the world, it's quote unquote developing world, don't have their farmers subsidized. So on one side, the government wants corn to be grown in the US so that they can promote their agenda as a country by using the excess amount of corn as corn they can donate, they can give as food aid, as a way of crushing the local market of corn farmers, so that ultimately the long-term strategy of America, I should say, is that they are willing to subsidize their farmers now in order to help crush the rest of the world corn market, so that ultimately they'll be the only ones who will be left in the market, because the local markets, the people who are farming corn without subsidies, are going to be ran out of business. They are going to be ran out of business because American farmers are getting subsidies. These people are selling corn at prices that are below cost in countries where America is exporting the corn. So ultimately, what will happen is the local corn farmers will close down, they'll move to something else, but they'll stop growing corn. That's one thing. And then when those countries are not self-sufficient in food, then they can become easier to manipulate by America as the global power or the empire that it is. But when you have people who have enough to eat, then it's much harder for an empire to control them. So that's the rationale for the government. So the government is supporting Monsanto because it wants Monsanto to make money, but also the government wants to have a lot of corn that they can use to crush other countries so that they can toe the line in order to maintain America's dominance. Secondly, it's important for me to mention that in terms of global politics, America wants the companies, the other countries, to grow things that it wants for itself, not that are the things that are good for the country. So America wants countries like Kenya to grow tea and coffee and to buy things from the US and to borrow money from the US through the World Bank and the IMF so that they can be indebted to America. By doing so, that shields the dollar from having to bear its own inflation or the inflation from the printing of money by the American government. So because so many countries have borrowed money using the American dollar, America can print billions of dollars like they did in 2020. Some people say they printed up to some people say $6 trillion in 2020, 2021. I think we discussed this before. We mentioned this before. And just to give a comparison, the only other time where a Western nation printed nearly that much money was in Germany following the Second White War in 1918. So in 1920s, because Germany had to pay reparations for the war that it caused, the Dutch mark the country was so, Germany was so poor that they had to print money in order to pay their debts. And at that time, that's the only time that Western country printed money almost in the same rate that America printed money in 2020 and 2021, and more specifically. And during that time in Germany, the exchange rate, the inflation in Germany went so high that the exchange rate for Dutch mark to dollar was $1 to 4.2 trillion Dutch marks for $1. But yet, America printed $4 trillion, maybe $6 trillion, depending on who you ask. But they printed a lot of money. But actually, we can say that some people say they printed up to $16 trillion within the time of the pandemic. So it depends on who you want to say. But they printed a lot of money. But the point is, however much money they printed, trillions they printed, the inflation rate in the US did not even go to 10%. So you know that inflation was exported to other people. The only reason why inflation can be American inflation can be exported to other people, countries, or to other people by extension, is because those countries have debts that are denominated in American dollars. So they cannot escape paying the cost of the inflation because they got loans in the dollars. So whatever happens to the dollar happens to their loans, and they have to pay for that. So the more dollars are printed, that makes their loans more expensive because they have to buy dollars at a very high price just to hide the inflation. Because if everything was fair and open, the more money they print in the US, the less valuable the money will become. Actually, that's the way inflation works. You print more money, your money becomes worth less. But because you're an empire, if you have to hide that, you have to get somebody else to carry that weight. So people have to pay more money for the dollar, even though you print this much money, so many dollars. That has been the basis of a lot of disputes, not only in other countries, but even in the West. The system of having dollar as the reserve currency happened in 1944 during the Bretton Woods Conference in New Hampshire. And the idea was that every country would only print an agreed amount of dollar based on their amount of gold they had in their country. So it was, the dollar was the reserve currency, but it was backed by gold. But during the Vietnam War again, America started printing more money than it had gold. So France said, give us the money back because I think you're doing something fishy. There's no way you can have all this money and you don't have that much gold for it. And that's why in 1971, Nixon ended the backing of the gold dollar because he knew if all the countries came and asked for the gold, brought the dollars back, there was no gold to give them because there was more dollars than there were gold. That's how we ended up the reserve currency. No, the gold's backing of the dollar with gold ended. So this is not the first time, and it's nothing new. But so that's how America exports its inflation to other countries. So, but it's much easier when you control the food in those countries. And those countries have to be deficient in food and have to buy food from the West. I went to St. Croix with my friend. I don't think he was able to join the class today, Anthony. Anthony and I and several other chefs went to St. Croix. And St. Croix used to export food in the 40s and 50s and 60s to America in large amounts. Now, St. Croix is a net importer of food. In fact, they grow a very, very small percentage of the food that they consume. That's the general trend in global politics. You impoverish the people, you make them dependent on you, and one of the easiest ways to do that is to make them food dependent. So, back to corn. So here we have American government playing a role, interested in producing a lot of corn, interested in promoting American corporations and interested in having a total dominance in the food production, especially corn, which is the most commonly consumed grain. When you add that to the fact that Roundup is a very, very toxic chemical, Monsanto had been fighting for the longest in courts, trying to deny that Roundup is carcinogenic. But in 2018, fortunately and finally, Dwayne Johnson in California court won the first case against Monsanto. He was awarded $280 million because it was evident that Monsanto does cause cancer. We know shortly after that, Monsanto was sold to Bayer, and they had 25,000 cases in court. So they finally agreed to a class action lawsuit and pay some people some money, but Roundup still continued to be used. So the more, yes. So what I just want to also mention is that I will move on to the next crop, is that as I mentioned, you have, because you have a guaranteed commodity you can grow and make money because the government is subsidizing it. Major corporations now are in this business, buying land, and it was actually a major scam because some people who are connected to lobbyists, who are connected to government officials, would buy land just to get a check from the government because they know whenever the government has so much corn, because it's buying the corn, the corn is buying, the government is buying the corn that the farmers are growing. Then if they have too much corn, they'll pay the farmers not to grow the corn. So there are people who are buying land and just sitting on it and just getting a paycheck, getting welfare from the government, right? So that was also another factor to consider, that there's a lot of money to be made by major corporations by owning land and speculating on the productivity of the corn market, whether there'll be enough corn or not enough corn, and these corporations make money. So that in itself shrunk the available land for more sustainable farming. So sustainable farming is being crushed from all sides, from corporations, from the government, from the companies. More force now is going towards growing things in a militaristic way that we discussed yesterday. So that's the important factor to make. Third point to make is that now, because the government is subsidizing corn, and corn is so much cheaper compared to any other grain that you probably can use to feed in a livestock, very few people can survive in their livestock industry if they don't feed corn to their animals. If you're growing any animals and you don't feed them corn, you're going to be driven out of business. That means that's unless you are in a very niche market, like an organic market where you can get high prices for your meat. But if you're just a regular farmer and growing your meat that you're not going to get a better price, you cannot compete with corn farmers, because now corn, because it's subsidized, is so cheap. Besides that, there are all these other corporations that see that corn is so cheap, it would make a perfect primary commodity for making other products. So people who are in the sugar industry, they look at the possibility, or they compare the price of getting sugar from corn or getting sugar from sugarcane, and they cannot compete because the government again is sliding the playing field. The playing field is not even. So corn always comes out on top. So before you know it, now instead of having commodities in the market that are using cane sugar, now they start using high fructose corn syrup. Third commodity that's very, very profitable, cornstarch. Now, instead of using regular starch from any other commodity, because corn is subsidized, the starch from corn becomes very, very cheap. Corn oil. If you compare oil from other comparable commodities, corn becomes very, very competitive. So you have corn oil. Corn lecithin becomes very, very attractive and very profitable thing to get. So you find that all these new products that are in the market cannot escape using corn, some kind of corn product, because it's so cheap. It's literally almost being given by the government. It's the biggest welfare game that you have in town. So that now becomes another really, really major factor that is influencing the kind of food system we have, because you have all these other products that you probably don't even think about. Stuff like ketchup. Who would think that? Most people think ketchup is mainly tomatoes, right? You go and look at it, the major ingredients they have there, and you have corn, high fructose corn syrup. So corn has invaded our every way, every aspect of our food system has been invaded by corn in one way or the other. And the one that you say, oh, well, this doesn't have corn, but it's still influencing corn in some possible way that we might not be very readily recognized. Because so much corn now is GMO, that means those corn fields, the more land we put to use to grow corn, that means the more land we pollute by spraying Roundup. So the more corn we grow, the more we are polluting the environment. So the water table, Roundup gets in the water table and pollutes the water table. The Roundup that we spray on the ground get washed by the drain water, and it ends up into the water system, into the oceans, into the marine and stuff. Now, we know in the South, all the water that we, rainwater ends up in the ocean, in the Gulf of Mexico. And now we have areas in the Gulf of Mexico whereby a lot of these Roundup and chemical fertilizers that we use to grow corn, because we're growing more corn than just about anything else, is causing the growth of algae that is suffocating the sea. And it's called, and creating what's called dead zone, also a concept called hypoxia. Hypoxia is dead zone because there's no oxygen in the water, so it kills all the marine life. And the zones, those areas, the size of those dead zones are just regularly, constantly growing annually. They're getting bigger and bigger. Now they are the size of almost 2 states now, equivalent of 2 states in the US. So it's a very, very big area. So now maybe if you are a fisherman, you didn't care about corn. Corn is influencing you. You are any other farmer, you're a fruit farmer, you farm orchard, you grow orchards, or you grow other commodities. All this flood water is coming to your area and it grows, it pollutes the soil. And once you have Roundup in the soil, maybe I should say, mention that there's some research that I've been following to see, that are trying to find out how long Roundup stays in the soil. They found one area where Roundup had been sprayed, and 21 years later, there's still Roundup in the ground. So very, very serious. So corn also uses other very toxic chemicals like atrazine. Atrazine is the most commonly used herbicide in growing corn in the US. And they have, I don't know all the chemicals, because we use so many chemicals. We use tens of thousands of chemicals. Some people say the modern agriculture uses over 100,000 different kinds of chemicals to grow food. Majority of them which are not good for your health. But so I don't want to make the impression that I know all of them. But in my own estimation, I don't know any other chemical that is has more controversial story than atrazine. And that's because there is a African-American researcher in California who was the first one to break the research. He works at the university there. And he found that atrazine is turning frogs, male frogs, into females. Or male frogs are producing eggs because of atrazine. And what's even more mind-boggling is that atrazine is epigenetic. So it doesn't only affect the frogs that came into contact with atrazine, but 3 generations down, those frogs are still affected by the atrazine. So a grandchild, a grand frog, a grand toad is going to pay the price of the atrazine exposure to atrazine by not its parent, but its grandparent. So that's just how toxic atrazine is. And atrazine can be carried by flood water 600 miles and still be active. So I can be using atrazine in my spot right here in Apex, and somebody in Florida can be affected. What's the name of that place, that big theme park in Florida that kids go to? I'm forgetting the name of the. Anybody remember?
Disney World?
Disney World. So I can use the atrazine here in Apex, and somebody in Disney World can suffer the consequences of exposure to atrazine 6 miles away from here. So that's that. So that's just how toxic corn is. And now you have people globally who have been socialized to use corn because of initially what the Spaniards, conquistadors, did by coming and taking the corn, spreading the corn all over the world. But now beyond that, genetically modifying it so that it can use more toxic chemicals as we become even more addicted to consuming corn. And that now people are having tripartite toxicity from the corn, from the chemicals that are used on the corn, from the GMO corn, and from the bad politics. They are being manipulated now because by eating corn, you are disempowering yourself, literally. You know, you're consuming your own freedom, you know, and or eating your way into food enslavement, because the Western world, especially America, are pushing GMOs with a full throttle, because they know once they can get everybody to stop growing their own seeds, they grow GMO seeds, they reign over the world, because then you can only grow food when you buy seeds from these people. And needless to say, that you know that GMO technology means that even if that gene is transferred to another crop, somebody else is growing, they own that crop. Or you owe them because that's their technology that is in your crop. And because it's your job to protect your corn from being infected by their own GMO technology, because you don't have a patent. It's just ridiculous. But because of interest of time, I have like 8 minutes that I have to cover all the other stuff. So I'll try to be very, very precise. I've talked about corn, explained which is the biggest elephant in the room. So let's just touch on these other things briefly. Now, because you have corn being grown in this humongous size of land in the US, that means that any farmer knows that you cannot constantly grow corn on the same piece of land over and over and over again. So you have to rest that land. So when you rest the land, and you have to, the best way to do it, one of the reasons why you have to rest land is to replenish some of the nutrients that has been taken by the commodity that you're growing there before. So it became just logical, the most logical thing to grow in the US on this corn farmland is soy. So soy now becomes another commodity that will be grown in huge numbers. Though soy is not a type of bean that Americans eat or is consumed hardly anywhere except in Asia, where they make tofu and they ferment it and all that stuff. So, but soy is the best fixer for nitrogen on these cornfields. So America has another problem now because it's growing all these soy beans and they don't know what to do with it. So one, they started making soy milk. The era when the soy milk hit the market was a time where dairy farmers were suffering huge losses because they were selling their milk below cost because there was a glut of milk in the US. But somebody came up with a very marketing strategy to sell milk, soy milk, as a non-dairy. It's vegan, it's smart, but you couldn't have anything more toxic as a form of milk than soy. There are other forms of things you can drink. There are rice milk, there was almond milk, there was cashew milk, there was all these other milk. But almost hands down, soy milk had to be the worst. One, if you look at the bean, go buy a soybean. Number one, I always ask people, have you ever gone to anybody's house and they actually serve you a soybean? No, nobody did. So one thing is, if you look at a bean, to turn that bean into milk is a very, very high process. So you're consuming a very highly processed commodity. That's number one. Number two, if it's not organic, even if it was organic, it's not a good, soybean is not something good to bake milk. It's not good milk. So that's just rest that there. Second thing is the soybean now became the sister to corn in animal feed. So you feed cows corn, and feeding corn, I didn't even get a chance to discuss that. It's so problematic. You know, I used to grow corn when I was young in my village, and we used to have cows. And every time I remember when I was a young boy, 7 years old, I saw it for the first time. At 7 years old, when the cow got in the granary and ate a lot of corn, it ate so much corn. When it ate all that corn, it's bloated and it almost died. And an elder about 3 farms down from our place was an expert, and my dad wasn't there, so only my mom and my brother were there. So my mother dispatched us to go and get this guy because he was very good. I guess, I don't know whether he had a track record of dealing with such problems, but he was highly respected as a farmer. So anyway, so he came to help us out. And when he came, he just told me, go get the kitchen knife quickly. So I went and got a long kitchen knife, and he just simply pierced the side of the cow because the cow was so bloated. They tried to give it soap so that it can throw up or whatever. None of that could happen. So the cow was at the risk of dying. And a cow dying in my village in those times, that was a major, major loss. A cow is one of the most valuable thing that most people had, you know, other than their land and anything else. A cow is both very personal part of a farm. You know, is both a pet, is a source of milk, but it's also something very valuable in terms of money and cost. But anyway, so he pierced the cow on the side, and the gas, the stomach of the cow let out the gas. So it shocked me to no end when I saw in the US that these cows that are eating corn every day, they put them in what they call CAFOs, concentrated animal feeding operations. So if you're following me, follow that. Remember that we say these major corporations are growing corn in very large tracts of land. Then they take smaller tracts of land and they concentrate the animals in one area, and they just feed the corn that they are growing with the Roundup. So here you are now the meat market is intoxicated with Roundup and chemical fertilizer. And one more thing, and now you add antibiotics. Because these animals are growing in such a small area, they are standing knee-high. Their feces is knee-high because there are so many of them in one area, because it's all about cost. Then these animals are prone to all kinds of diseases. So they have a vial. Each and every cow has a vial on its ear that drops antibiotics just at all times. So without realizing it, Americans or people who consume American meat start being exposed to not only Roundup, chemical fertilizer, but now, and atrazine and all these other things, but now very high levels of antibiotics. So much so that some people will go to the doctor and they get some antibiotics and they already have a resistance to it. So now, because they are giving these animals so much corn, they have to cut a hole in some of these cows, a hole big enough to where you can fit your fist on the side of the cow, and then it heals and it just leaves a big gaping hole like this, where you can just stand right there and look at see the food being churned in and out because of the diet, largely because of the corn. But now, because they can only eat corn by itself, then they have soy. And the soy is being grown on the same land where they are growing Roundup. They are spraying with the Roundup and keep growing with chemical fertilizer. So soy, along with corn, join the gravy train. It becomes a very cheap commodity because it's so grown in so much abundance, okay? And there are some subsidies also for the soy farmers because these are the corn farmers, so they are getting subsidies. So soy becomes the other commodity that's going to enslave us because it's so cheap. So soy oil becomes abundant. Soy as a feed becomes abundant. Soy lecithin becomes abundant. Now that we talked about it, go to your pantry and see how many products you have in your pantry that don't have high corn fructose syrup, cornstarch, soy lecithin, or soy product, period. Those 4 ingredients. When we get off the class, we can even end the class, go look at that. So that's what we have. I have like 6 minutes. Okay, I'll try to cover this. So that's soy. So we had the idea where soy is going. Now let's talk about wheat. Wheat is a product that has been consumed for a long time in the US, going back to the Egyptians that were growing wheat. But the wheat they were growing there was very different, had very low gluten, and was being grown without the use of toxic chemicals. Now, in America, the wheat becomes genetically modified and grown with chemicals. But now, because of the climate change, because of the kind of industrial agriculture that we have in the globe now going on, the climate is changing. More pasture land that was just sequestrating carbon was being torn, and corn is grown in those pieces of land. Trees were being cut down. The Amazon was being cut because they want to grow soy because that's a big thing now. So the kind of agriculture we have is also affecting the climate. Now, because of that the weather areas that particularly are becoming areas to grow, and so the big farmers lose because what the farmers started doing is spraying Roundup on top of the wheat so that it can dry. Once it's done, they just spray the Roundup on it, and so that way they can harvest it right quick before maybe start raining before they harvest the crop. So by doing that, now you find a lot of wheat has Roundup in it, to the point whereby some people think they are gluten intolerant, but they are not gluten intolerant. They're intolerant to Roundup that's used to on the food, on the wheat. So, and this wheat that's just sprayed there, and they just harvest it, dried, and grind it. So you have almost live glyphosate on the wheat. So that's why in my Afrofuturistic conscious cuisine, those are ingredients that I have X'd out. They have for other reasons, but obviously we don't eat anything. I don't never recommend anything that's not organic because of some of the reasons I've explained to you today. Because you cannot eat mindlessly. You have to recognize that somebody's at war with you. So simply because you don't think somebody's war, or you don't have any beef against any other person, that doesn't mean that you're not under attack or our food is not under attack. So I think I have 2 minutes left. So I think I've covered, yes, I've covered the 3 commodities I know the last 2 ones, we'll be talking more about those in class in future, but I wanted to give us a very, very basic understanding about how we got to where we are and why now, because I can say now that is the foundation of Afrofuturistic conscious cuisine. That's why I do the work that I do. That's why I came up with a cuisine that navigates around some of these traps, because I don't know how else anybody can get out of here alive with this kind of shenanigans and culinary subterfuge, playing Russian roulette with people's food. So yeah, so I'll pause there, and I'm happy to answer any question you may have. Brilliant information. Do you have a cookbook? I'm working on a book, and the person who is holding the show is in here too. So I don't need to mention his name. But yeah, we got a cookbook. For me, I can answer that there. A cookbook, my cookbook would have to be a very complex cookbook. So my strategy was to first teach 108 people. That's just a number that I have in my head that if I can teach you guys first, then you're doing 3 things. 1, I'm getting the information to as many people as I can, so that even if I don't get the book, something happened to me, you already know. That's number 1. Number 2, books are very problematic because people buy books, sometimes they don't read. So books are good for the publishers, books are good for posterity, but the age in which we are, with all the books that are published, we haven't noticed any significant increment in health. More bad things are happening faster than good things are happening. So I'm not making an excuse. I want to write a book, but I just want to say this to make an appeal to you. What you're doing by attending the class is you're supporting my mission. You're getting the information, and you're also taking an oath. Because once you have the information, you cannot not know. Once you know, you cannot know. Okay? So now you have a responsibility. Before I told you what I told you, it was only my responsibility, and because I know this information. By having 108 people who knows, then 1, they're helping finance the work, because all this work, I don't make any money from anybody else. I don't take any corporation money. I don't have any people. I get donations from people who think this work is valuable. So support the work, get the word out, and then once we write the book will have already ready market, and the work. But I guess the biggest thing I'm saying is that the issue is so critical that I'm so impatient that I don't have the patience right now to sit down and write while you are eating bad food right now, waiting for me to publish the book. So I have to do all these things at the same time. So I'm writing the book, but I also have it. Thank you very much. I hope that answers your question. Anybody else? Quite insightful. Who is okay, good. Yeah. Yes, but I can say that, and I'm never ashamed to beg. I'm a very proud man. If there's was one, and I'm not ashamed to say that. But I have to say we have to support the work, because the work cannot continue if we don't support it. And it doesn't just say thank you, which is good, but we have to have money. We have to have money to work. That's part of the reason why I haven't written the book, because Yes, let me just put it that way. And I'm working on a podcast as well, and I'm pushing the program. I opened a full literacy and sustainability center. I'm mentoring young men, some of who are here, and I'm glad to see them because this is war if ever there's one. If we ever thought we were free, especially as Africans, as Black people, I have news for you, that through food we'll be worse slaves than we ever were at any one given time. Because these people have technology and they have so much information. These corporations have so much information about what you eat, what you do, how much money you want. There's never been in such a time. So any other question? Have you thought about podcast? Yeah, I'm thinking about podcast. Yes, I'm working. Yeah, again, my challenge is how many times I have in a day. That's how many hours I have in a day, and I'll do all that. All that is coming. But again, I can't stress enough how getting support is the game killer. If you don't have enough support, then it irks me to no end that a lot of my support has to come from people who I might not necessarily just agree with. Yes, they're not corporations, but I have to go to university institutions and stuff and talk about. If in my ideal world, I think people who stand to benefit the most should be able to support the work the most. Okay, that's just my thinking. Yes. Carol Irungu. Yes, sir. All right. Let me know if you have any ideas. I'm open to any ideas. And at the end of this, at the end of Monday, it will be open enrollment. Please consider enrolling for a class. That would be a very, very big support. Let other people know Dawn has been paying for all the people who are attending a class. Every single time, Dawn pays. Every time somebody attends, Dawn pays for them. Okay, that's a whole book I'd like to write one day when not too far away from now, about how Dawn saved a movement from dying. And as other people, I say, I'm not only Dawn. I have very, very strong supporters. But I said, somebody say, all right. So yeah. So any other question? We'll finish the next class by talking about all the class. I don't want to shout out a class. I don't want to get ahead of myself, but first get information and then we can talk about what we can do and what role everybody can play. Yes, but we're very glad to see you, and we want to be respectful of your time. 9:34. I'm committing myself to be on time and release everybody on time, and so that we have a wonderful class next day and people will come. It's just a thing I want to do. I like to push that agenda for us. We do things on time and become the standard. Okay, we've done that before in our history, and we don't have to be late unless we have to. And when we're late, then there's good justification. I don't have any issues with it. But because this is 3 times a week, the class is 3 times a week, I know it's a lot of quite a bit of time commitment on other people's part, and I want to be that. But yes, so reach out if you have any question on the side. I'm around. I'm always around. This is my job 100% of the time. Yes, I don't have any other job. I've been offered many jobs. I don't take because I say, let me just put it that way. We all, maybe I should, let me not take that with me because I wanted to say, I recognize that the time that all of us were employed is when we were enslaved. The time that, especially in America, the time that we had 100% employment for Black people is when we were slaves. So that means that, some of us have to work on the outside while some others work on the inside, okay? I'm not brushing work, but I'm just saying we have all work. There's nothing that's not work. Even trying to figure out how we can be liberated is still work, okay? Enjoy the rest of the day. Thank you very much. And look for the next link for the next class on Monday, which we'll talk about more in general. There's some things I still didn't touch, I want to touch, but we want to wrap up by talking about some evolutionary and anthropological information about food that we can learn from an African perspective that can be useful in helping us understand our food. Okay? Enjoy the day and see you next time.
Daio, chef.
Daio.
Daio, everybody.
Daio.